When Thomas Edison was 12 years old, his teacher saw little evidence that he had any talent at all and wrote, "He is a little idiot" at the top of his report card, and he was probably right. I mean, sure, Thomas did graduate from high school as the second best student in his class and was regarded by his peers as one of the most promising scholars in America. But really, it doesn't take a genius to figure out how to spell cat. It takes a genius to invent an electric chair. Okay, maybe being able to spell cat does take a certain level of intellect. My point is, Thomas Edison wasn't considered a genius at heart, but his inventions were genius and they changed the world. Hi, I'm your host and this is our channel. And today we're answering the extraordinary question, was Thomas Edison actually an idiot? Take the first page of his report card, if you can call it that, because it doesn't have any grades on it. On June 8, 1847, Thomas was sent to school for the first time. His mother, who was his primary caretaker after his father left the family when he was only 2 years old, wanted her son to learn a trade, so that he could get a job and help support the family. But after the first day of classes, his teacher was less than impressed. She noted that he didn't seem to know his alphabet very well and that he could unread. To be fair to him, she wrote that he did read a few sentences during class, but overall he just seemed confused and disengaged. What's more, according to his teacher, Thomas was incorrigible. That is to say, he was unable to be corrected. On top of all this, he also had a speech impediment, which likely contributed to his classmates tormenting him about talking funny. Thomas was obviously having a hard time settling into school, and he ended up cutting out of class after just 3 days. So now his mother was faced with the problem of how to educate her son without the help of teachers. Instead of letting Thomas go to public school, she started homeschooling him. Luckily, Thomas was bright enough to catch on quickly, and his mother could tell he had a lot of natural ability. While his classmates were working on learning their ABCs, Thomas was reading Shakespeare. By age 12, he was already operating a printing press and doing freelance printing jobs. He then worked as a printer's apprentice on a local newspaper, and by age 15, he was editor of the paper. As you can see, he certainly didn't need school, at least not conventional school. And in retrospect, it might have been better for Thomas to never have gone to school at all. But the point of the story isn't what might have been, it's about what was. And what was that Thomas Edison was a brilliant self-educated man. Let's go back to that fateful report card again. You've seen the top of it, but what about the bottom? Well, there isn't a bottom. There's nothing written on the other side of the sheet at all. This is because Thomas didn't turn his report card in to his mother, nor has it ever been seen by anyone. He made many life-changing inventions such as the telegraph, the phonograph, the camera, the radio, the telephone, and the incandescent light bulb. But his greatest invention was the idea of inventing. Before Thomas, inventors would make a single item and sell the patent to a manufacturer who would then produce the item en masse. In contrast, Thomas would invent an item and immediately think about how he could manufacture it on a large scale. He realized that if he could make thousands of items, he could make thousands of dollars, and thus he established the first industrial research laboratory and the first serious school of engineering. But while Thomas is credited with inventing these amazing items, he didn't always invent them on his own. For example, some say he stole the idea for the electric light bulb from another inventor named Joseph Swan. They both filed for patents at the same time, and each of them had invented very similar light bulbs, but only Edison received the patent. It's hard to say whether Thomas Edison was a genius or not, but what we do know is that he loved to take credit for everything. Some claim he was a visionary leader, while others say he was a manipulative tyrant. He was a demanding boss and expected his employees to work long hours for little pay. He could be rude and abrasive, and he wasn't afraid to use people to get ahead. But the fact remains, he did hire thousands of people over the years, many of whom probably weren't being paid much, but they were still employed nonetheless. And sometimes Thomas's mean streak would turn into full-blown rage. On December 14, 1888, while working in his Menlo Park laboratory, Thomas called for a meeting with his staff. Everyone came running except for one employee named Robert Lemp. Just because Thomas hadn't gotten mad at him yet didn't mean he wasn't going to. So Robert stayed in his office working on his lathe. A few minutes passed, and Thomas, who was waiting for Robert to arrive, grew impatient. He walked down the hall to Robert's office and knocked on the door. When no one answered, he turned the knob and barged inside. Robert was sitting at his desk with his back to the door. "Get up," shouted Thomas. "You're fired." Then he grabbed Robert by the collar and shoved him out of his chair. Robert stood up and started to defend himself, but Thomas kept yelling at him to get out of his lab. Soon the two were struggling on the floor and Thomas pushed Robert onto a metal hook. Blood spurted everywhere. Robert was rushed to the hospital where he died 2 days later from blood poisoning. Obviously, this was a terrible tragedy and a huge mistake on Thomas's part. But like anything else, it was another learning experience on the road to making the world a better place. After all, this incident inspired him to write down rules for his lab. Specifically Rule No for states, no fighting in the shop at any time. Now, if Thomas had followed his own rules, he may have been a bit more likable, but his biggest rival didn't feel the same way about him either. We're talking about the infamous Nikola Tesla, perhaps the greatest genius of all time. Both men had big dreams of illuminating the world, but only one would come out on top. Let's find out who that was. In the late 1800s, there were two competing systems for producing electricity: direct current or DC, and alternating current or AC. Direct current could only travel short distances and was inefficient at powering heavy machinery. Alternating current, on the other hand, could travel long distances and be efficiently converted into different voltages, which made it ideal for powering heavy machinery. Of course, this meant that whoever controlled the supply of AC would control the world. And both Edison and Tesla were determined to be that person. But only one would win the war of the currents. Tesla began experimenting with AC in 1887. But he needed investors to build a plant that could generate large amounts of power. Enter George Westinghouse, owner of Westinghouse Electric. Tesla showed Westinghouse how powerful AC was, and he immediately invested in Tesla's technology. Within 3 years, the company built the first AC generating station in the world. Now the plan was to use AC to power the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, but the city's mayor worried that Edison would cause trouble for them. At the time, Thomas Edison was a celebrity in America, and the last thing Chicago officials wanted was for him to get angry at them and ruin their party. So they offered him a deal. He could set up his own DC plant and supply electricity for the fair, but he wouldn't be allowed to compete against Westinghouse, i.e., he couldn't show off AC in any way. Thomas readily agreed and went about setting up his plant. He even bought stock in Westinghouse to show how serious he was. But once his plant was up and running, he began showing off AC anyways. Not only that, he also set up a competing company called the Edison Electric Illuminating Company. This obviously upset Tesla and Westinghouse, but they knew they couldn't do anything about it. Even though AC was superior to DC, the fact of the matter was customers could only buy Edison's electricity, so he could charge whatever he wanted and they would have no choice but to pay up. The turning point in the War of the Currents came at the St. Louis Exposition in 1896. Here Thomas Edison had the opportunity to demonstrate the power of DC, but his machine broke down shortly after he turned it on. In contrast, Tesla's friend George Westinghouse was given the opportunity to showcase the power of AC, and guess what happened? His machine broke down, too. It was looking bleak for AC until a young engineer named John Fritz stepped in and fixed the machines. From that moment on, John dedicated his life to proving that AC was the future of electricity. He believed that AC would transform the lives of millions of people around the world, and he spent the rest of his career trying to make that happen. In 1901, John joined forces with Tesla to form the Tesla Electric Company, which later became General Electric, or GE. Together, they developed induction motors, which were used in everything from refrigerators to airplanes. In the process, John also helped popularize AC around the world. With John's help, the AC system was chosen over the DC system to power Niagara Falls, the city of St. Louis, and eventually the entire planet. And that's why we can all agree that Thomas Edison was an idiot. I'm your host, and this was our channel. And if you want to learn more about Thomas Edison, watch the video. Who was the real Thomas Edison?